your country, and what happens when you try to be transparent about it with your audience. We're going to find out the answers to those questions from Daniel Pacheco.
Thank you. Welcome to Colombia, people. So this is going to be a self-referential story. That's because I want to talk about how journalists are becoming, and perhaps in your country also, increasingly part of the news, and how that's hampering our ability and our credibility to convey the actual news in the age of fake news. This feels a bit like asking for advice, PR advice to journalists. But I do want to ask you tonight, what should we do about this? How should we handle this stoically? Should we handle this proactively? So back in 2012, I was a DC correspondent for a Colombian news organization. And my job consisted mostly on standing in front of white buildings and rehashing US news to Colombia. So I had some free time. And then I met this guy. He also had a lot of free time because he worked in the Inter-American Development Bank. He was a Thai. He was a politically appointed post, and we shared that free time with some coffee sometimes. But then Duque went back to Colombia and he became a senator. I eventually also went back to Colombia, and by pure coincidence, I swear, he found out there was an opening for a job I eventually got, and he was the person who mentioned my name to the guy who hired me. It's a political debate show, and I like to think it was by my merit, and at least the numbers show it, that I got this job. But the fact that I got the job through a politician, it always made me feel uncomfortable. Especially when Duque came to my show, because he had this thing. He liked to tell people when we were off camera that he helped me get my job. So finally, I decided to come open. I decided to tell this story myself. So I decided to be transparent. And it was a consistent attitude, I thought, because I had talked a lot about how in Colombian journalism we needed to regain lost credibility by being transparent and open to criticism. My disclaimer went mostly unnoticed for almost 2 years. That's until I criticized some social media influencers, activists who have become like self-proclaimed fighters against corruption. They strongly disagreed with my newest stance I took on the Odebrecht scandal. And they let me know about it on social media. More than arguments, they had attacks. And you know, that's fair game on Twitter. But they also brought my disclaimer to light at a time when Duque was now president of Colombia. And they used it to make me look bad, to make people believe I was a government tool. And some 3 years of work, 700 TV shows went to the garbage because of 30 seconds in social media. And I know this happens all the time, but it's funny. The transparency that new audiences want from journalists were used to attack my journalism. And this has become a part of media in Colombia. There's Camila Zuluaga. She's a much more influential journalist than me, and she's under attack by some politicians and their followers. Others, fake news journalists and their fake news outlets also have attacked journalists. And look, I think the relationship between power and journalism in this country is very problematic. Just to illustrate, Juan Manuel Santos, our former president, his nephew was the director of the most important political magazine, and he was also related to the guy who directed El Tiempo. And mainstream journalism has been terrible about disclosing our conflicts of interest. The richest man in the country owns El Tiempo, and his businesses appear in El Tiempo very frequently, and they have a policy of not disclaiming that tie. So we also have a revolving door in Colombia, and that doesn't exist in other countries between PR and journalism. And in that sense, I think Colombian audiences are inclined to be suspicious about journalists. And they're right. And we should be inclined to be transparent. But how should we do this without becoming vulnerable to attacks? Should we just press on and hope that truth will prevail? Or should we become social media warriors? Should we spend time and resources defending ourselves, responding, producing social media content to fight the fight on social media? And there's always the frightening effect. I call it post-traumatic Twitter trend disorder. Shutting down, leaving public debate on social media, even leaving journalism because you don't want to be out there. You don't want to be harmed in the social debate. So to sum up, it's not the unfairness of the issue that I'm concerned with. You know, this is the new reality. Information is now the domain of influencers, of activists, and they can broadcast it as we did before them. Everyone can broadcast now. What I want to ask you tonight is, what should we do about this? Thanks a lot.